So what's it going to take? At level 1, you have the 17 practices that we've talked about. So you just have to meet those 17 practices. And honestly, most companies that have a good cyber hygiene today, you're probably going to be mostly compliant with level 1 as long as you're doing kind of the normal security things that you should be doing. All right. We have just released a guide for CMMC level 1 compliance. You can go. We're going to have it linked on our website. You can go to our resources page to get it from there. You can also. It was a joint document that we released with Microsoft. So you can go to Microsoft and download the document as well. Search for Microsoft CMMC level 1 guide. And you can probably find it that way. But we have a guide on how to do that within the Microsoft ecosystem. Level 2, you're going to have to implement the 110 practices of NIST 80171 R2. Like I said earlier with the R3 conversation, this number of practices is going to increase when 80171 R3 is released later this year, early next year. So be prepared for that. And then level 3, right now what we understand is that's going to be 134 practices based on the 110 of NIST 80171 plus 24 practices that come from NIST 80172. Now, that set of practices has not yet been defined. They have not finalized that, so we don't know exactly what that looks like yet. But we do know that it's going to be a subset of what is in NIST 80172 at this point. Okay, so on the right-hand side, you kind of see a process that a real high-level process of that you need to go through to be able to get CMMC L2 certified. Okay, first, make sure you identify your CUI. Know where your CUI exists, identify it, build data flow diagrams to show how it moves through your organization. Does it come in via email? How does it come into your organization? How does it move through your organization to, if you're a manufacturer, does it go to your shop floor? Does it move through your Office 365 environment into SharePoint? Is it discussed in Teams? Is it stored off on a file share? Does it go to a workstation for CAD drawings? All these different data types, they have different data flows and they go all throughout your organization. Well, anywhere that data flows has to be secured to the standard. So you have to identify where the data is before you can actually put a plan together to secure the IT infrastructure for that holds that data. Okay, so the second piece would be defining your security boundary. Once you know where the data flows, then you can define a security boundary around that data. Third, if you're going to use cloud-based systems, ensure that you're only leveraging FedRAMP moderate equivalence cloud solutions or higher. So do not go out and use a cloud hosting provider that has not been through the FedRAMP process. They're not authorized to handle controlled and classified information. So make sure that you're only leveraging FedRAMP moderate or FedRAMP moderate equivalent solutions. You want to make sure that any solution that you use, be it on-prem or cloud, can meet the 7012 paragraph C through G requirements around forensics and incident reporting. That's very, very important. You don't want to have an incident and then not be able to give the government the data that they request as part of the paragraph C through G while they're going through an incident investigation. Once you just start building your environment, you want to make sure that you're building it to the 80171 standards, and not just to the 110 controls, but to the 320 assessment objectives that are listed in the assessment guide. You've got to make sure that you're building to the assessment objectives, because if you just build to the controls, you're going to miss things. It's very important that you pay attention to the 80171 assessment objectives. Lastly, or next, build out your policies and procedures. Some companies will try and do this internally. Some companies will outsource this to help come in and build compliant policies and procedures for developing your internal corporate security program. You've got to make sure that you have a functioning security program to be able to not only implement this capability, but also to maintain this capability long term. Once you get the environment built out, you've got the policies and procedures in place, you want to basically migrate your content. Because you may not be able to make the existing system that you're in today compliant. You're likely going to have to build a new system and then migrate the content from your old system into your new system to get it into a compliant infrastructure. Now, once all that's done, you've got all the data in the right place, ensure that you have the policies, the procedures, the work instructions, that your entire environment is currently being operated to standard based on NIST 80171. Don't build out an environment and then not maintain it, because if you don't maintain it, it's going to fall out of compliance with NIST 80171 very, very quickly. Then you want to make sure, go back and do a final check and ensure your SSP is fully up to date, your system security plan is fully up to date. And once you have all of those kinds of things done, that's when you would reach out to a C3PAO and for either a pre-assessment, to have somebody come in and do a pre-assessment to see if you're ready, or if you're very confident, then to just schedule an assessment with a C3PAO. Then they'll come in, they'll do basically some initial question and answer to even determine if they will come assess you, because they don't want to come out and try and assess a company that they can very easily determine is not compliant. So they're going to go through some discovery process as part of the assessment process to ensure that you actually meet some minimum requirements before they'll even come look any deeper. And so that would be the next step, is scheduling that assessment. So that's a quick overview of kind of what that process would look like and the different steps that you need to take as an organization to get your company ready to go through a CMMC L2 certification. Okay, let's see. We've got some more questions here. I know we have about 10 minutes left, so I have a few more slides to get through, but I think we're going to be okay on time. Yeah, so there's one question here. If there are over 300,000 companies that need assessment and only 23 current C3PAOs, how will a company be able to meet the requirements to be assessed by next year? It's impossible at this point. So yeah, this is an actual issue. This is a real issue. And so first of all, the 300,000 number is all up. That 300,000 number is for L1, L2, and L3 companies. The majority of those, probably 220,000 or so of those companies, are going to be self-assessment CMMC L1 companies. The remaining 80,000 are the ones that are going to need the third-party assessment. Well, that doesn't make the numbers that much better, because we still only have 23 C3PAOs at this point, right? And so if you look at the numbers of assessment teams that we need, if you just do the math, based on the math that I've done, we're going to need somewhere around 1,400 or so assessment teams across all assessment companies to be able to execute and then maintain the assessment, the 3-year assessment cycle for the defense industrial base. And so while the government is going to be is ramping up the number of C3PAOs that they're approving, so you're going to start seeing more C3PAOs approved, and then those C3PAOs are also training more assessment teams as well. And so it is going to take a year or two to get the C3PAO community really built up to the size where they can do everybody. But this kind of comes down to the point that there's not going to be enough assessors to go around when it's time to actually get the assessments done. So what is the government going to do about that? They're going to probably look at how many contracts do they put the CMMC requirement in day one. There's probably going to be a little bit of that, but there's also going to be a lot of companies are simply going to be left on the outside looking in if they're not ready today. So if you're not already on the list of a C3PAO saying, hey, we're ready to go, then you're probably at risk of not being able to get one of the early assessments, even after the final rule is done. I was talking to a newly approved C3PAO just a couple of days ago, and they have already told me that they're backed up. They're 6 to 9 months backed up at this point right now with the companies that they already have on their list. And so, back to the point I made earlier about we're already within the window of you're out of time. That's basically where we are. We're to a point where the industry, the people that have not jumped in on this earlier are going to get to a point where they're simply not going to be able to get the assessment, which is then going to make them not eligible to bid for the contracts. That's a problem. It's a problem the government's going to have to deal with, but that is where we are based on the rules that are in place and the size of the ecosystem that we have at this point. So we're going to have to see what happens over the next 6 to 9 months with that. Okay? All right, so as we're working with companies, what kind of failures do we typically see? These are the kinds of things that when we're working with an organization, what happens or what do we see when we're working with them that essentially breaks or makes them non-compliant? There's things from a technical standpoint. There's DFARS requirements that sometimes they don't meet. There's procedural controls and documentation pieces they don't meet, and I've listed some of them here. And so, if you want to do a real quick, mental exercise, look at each one of these, points and determine which ones of these are my company, not doing today. And that would be one of the first places that I would start looking at, making sure that you close that hole, right? Do you have multi-factor authentication on everything, all the way down to the desktop within your security boundary? Do you have vulnerability management in place? Are you doing vulnerability scans and vulnerability remediation? Do you have users that have full administrative access to their desktops, even though they should not be privileged users? That's a problem, and so that's the thing that a lot of people deal with. On the DFAR side, making sure that you're not leveraging non-compliant solutions. If you're in Office 365 Commercial and you're dealing with controlled unclassified information, that is a bad platform. You cannot do CMMC Level 2 with controlled unclassified information sitting in Office 365 Commercial. The platform does not support the requirement set. That is one thing that we have to work with a lot of companies on. From a procedural standpoint, do you have data flow diagrams? Do you have a risk management plan in place? Do you have an incident response plan? Have you tested that incident response plan? Are you doing tabletop exercises around that incident response plan to ensure that you're testing it appropriately? Have you adopted all of your processes and your work instructions? Are they being followed appropriately? If an assessor came in and asked to see your work instructions for a certain way of how you add a user to your environment, do those work instructions exist? Those kinds of questions you need to ask yourself, okay?